we're
Set.
coming up on here
I
now.
have official time.
Okay.
Oh, boss.
Good evening, folks. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting for February 13th. It's a joint meeting tonight with the Selectmen and the School Committee. And on our agenda, we have the fiscal year 2019 operating capital budgets, including the use of school reserves. We'll have a field maintenance agreement status update. And then we'll go into financial dashboard discussion, member updates, public input, and minutes. So let's start with the first item. Are you folks all in session? Got quorum? You got quorum, right, you guys?
Full house, same as you guys.
So the board of selectmen's here with us.
We don't have a quorum, but we'll proceed.
Okay.
We're anticipating a quorum.
So we may have a late comer.
Yes,
You need one more for a quorum?
yes.
Okay.
But we don't,
Detention when they get here late, you know, from the school committee.
No, you're out.
exactly.
Bonnie, why don't you walk us through what we're going to cover here tonight with the budget planning, et cetera?
The first item that I wanted to go through is the status of the 2019 operating budget as it's being developed. We do have some new information from your last meeting, in that we did receive the House 1 budget proposals, which show a reduction in state aid for the town, in net school and town state aid. And we've also received some revised requests for the budget for the school department, and updated levy increases that include like new growth and the 2.5% allowed increase. So I'll just kind of walk through that first.
Sure.
Under the level staffing and required services budget, there is a deficit currently of $639,953. Basically, this is the same staffing levels as currently in fiscal 2018, inclusive of any increases to support just step and salary adjustments that might be contractually due. The school appropriated budget increase is set at $1,073,300. This is a change from the previous request, so I had forwarded that off from the school committee chair. And that's about a 5.69% increase. We haven't received the use of school reserves in the fiscal 19 operating budget, but we did receive the updates. Thank you for the 2018 and 17 uses, and I did include that in a separate attachment for your reading pleasure. The town operating budgets increased by $712,000 in 2019, or 8.91%, primarily due to the full fiscal impact of staffing that was added mid-year for this fiscal year. There were 6 paramedics that were added as of January, so the full impact is felt in fiscal 19. And there's also one full-time IT support person. I would add that the impact of the paramedics is using an offset from ambulance receipts to try to mitigate that, but it is a budget increase to look at when you're looking year to year. The mission budget and the full school requested budget has a deficit of $1,860,000, so that's a larger one to deal with. And this one is set with any staffing increases that the department might feel is necessary to best meet the needs of the community. Based on our current projections, which again include the House 1 budget, we have an additional $1.9, almost $2 million in available revenue in fiscal 19 over fiscal 18. It's almost a 4% increase. The primary driver is from the tax levy. So $883,000 is the new growth, is the 2.5% increase that's allowed. And $843,000 is estimated in new growth. It's an aggressive estimate. We keep, tweaking it as we get further along in the permitting process, but this is a pretty good number to be using because it's based on what's in place as of January 1st. And that's what affects us into the next fiscal year, so.
Does this include sort of the last wave of the point?
Yeah, the movie
with the
theater.
movie theater
Yes,
and sort of that, so
yes.
that bucket's dried up?
For right now, yeah, with what's in permitting. And there's a significant increase in residential housing also. There's a lot of new building going on, but this is the last part of the commercial stuff that we know is coming through the pipeline.
About how much what is the split in the ballpark? Is it half and half?
No, I think in this year, it's more commercial and less residential. And I want to say it was about 17 million in commercial and like 9 or 10 million in residential. And then there's some, like another 9 million in personal property. So,
Thank you.
yep. Net state aid estimates are slightly down by about 22,000. While they might give a little bit more in, Chapter 70 or unrestricted general government aid, they take away in the assessments. Assessments did increase for charter, for school choice, and a couple of other areas on the town side too. So we ended up down by 22,000, which is consistent with what's happened the last few years. We really have been flat for state aid for about 5 years. There were staffing increases requested in the mission budget. So I've kind of itemized them here so you can see where they are and what the fiscal impact could be. These are all incorporated into the mission budget requests, so the fringe and the staffing level increases. So in the planning department, we're looking to shift funding that's currently paid out of an article into the general fund budget, about 5 hours a week for the planner. So that would not impact fringe, but will affect the budget. In highway, there are 2 laborers requested for the Parks Division at $73,000 with about $33,000 in fringe. In cemetery, there's a seasonal laborer requested at just over $10,000 with about $1,500 in fringe. It's seasonal work. There's not a big impact to fringe. The police department is looking for an additional dispatcher at about $52,000 with $24,000 in fringe. The library is looking for 4.5 hours for existing staff, so it's about $7,400 with just over $1,000 in fringe. Facilities, we're looking for a full-time public facilities director at $88,000 estimated, with $40,000 in fringe. And in the school department, there's staffing increases for an assistant principal at Shaker Lane, math science specialist at Shaker Lane and Russell Street, and computer science and math at the high school. So it's 95, 85, and 65 on the staffing estimates, and 43, 39, and 29 on the fringe. So the total impact is $487,000 in salary increases, with another $214,000 in fringe impact.
Bonnie, would the
About 700,000.
public facilities director cover all town buildings, including schools?
That would be the goal, but that would be something that would need to be worked out between the school committee and the Board of Selectmen through an agreement.
Okay.
Any discussions started on that? I mean,
Yeah.
Investing in the $130,000 person and not have the schools involved is kind of,
We have talked a little bit, Mike Font, Kelly Country, Steve Mark, so real preliminary though, right now. But we have started a little bit of conversation.
From the school committee perspective, I think really the question is, we're prepared to talk about it whenever anybody else is, and I think really the only hesitation is how serious and close are we to actually executing on the hire? I mean, if it's still a wish, then it would be kind of a hypothetical conversation, which again, we don't mind having, but, I think that's the hesitation, really, not, from all parties' perspective, is just, how close are we to really doing it? The closer we get, the more, obviously, incentive there is to actually get down to the nuts and bolts of that kind of discussion.
But the willingness is there.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Does that satisfy your question?
in this environment, adding $130,000, I mean, I would.
It should be part of the
before-
conversation.
Yeah, before I stood up in front of town meeting and supported it, I'd want some commitment that it was more than just the town side buildings. So I don't know how you get the cart behind the horse here, but I would hope that we could get a serious discussion going. And if you guys can come to agreement, then.
Should be part of the
I
job
personally
description, I would
want to
think.
support this as a high priority, but if
right
there is
now,
no
we're-
agreement, then it's not worth going forward, in my mind.
Right now, we're a $600,000 deficit, so, we're not,
More than that, which you.
well, I know,
should be
but
able to-
before you even start talking about any of those policies, all I'm saying, so I don't know how.
Okay, so.
Mr. Chairman, I would say that between the two boards, or the three boards, we can come to some sort of resolution before our next joint meeting.
Duly noted.
Some other items aside from staffing that are in the mission budget request, and actually within the level staffing and the required services budget, we're shifting some monies out of the highway budget into the parks budget to better reflect the field maintenance component that we're currently spending, and to provide a little bit more transparency. So we're shifting $158,000 in salaries that's currently in highway down into parks, just to show it, where it's actually effectively being used. But in the mission budget, there's a request to add an additional $170,000 in expenses to better address the needs that were identified in the field needs assessment study.
So is it the plan with these two additional laborers that are being requested by Highway, presuming they get approved, they will bill Park and Rec for that labor? Or is it more on the maintenance side?
No, that would be an increase into the public works budget
Okay.
to add additional staffing for that. The mission budget also has an increase in the roadway repair expense from the $720,000 that's currently planned for, which would address the Mattawanakie and Hartwell and a couple of other issues with maintenance. It would request to increase that to $1,211,000 to start addressing the needed repairs at the high school entrance road and parking areas. The repairs are estimated to be in excess of $1 million, but you could phase it in over 2 years, or several periods, so. And, let's see.
And I think 500,000 is in the PMBC ask, isn't it?
Your PMBC ask was like 800,000, but 600 was to address the demolition of,
Oh,
yeah,
right.
so you don't have that in there.
So is that in the school budget, or is just?
This would be
stand-
in highway, so
Oh, it's in highway,
Chris
okay.
Stoddard would handle the repairs through the normal chain that he would use.
Okay.
Let's see, as a reminder, on the excluded debt, we did apply $339,000 in overlay surplus funds this year to reduce the debt, the excluded debt level, and it saved about 19 cents on the single rate. We could apply additional monies that might become available to further reduce the rate. We've got that rate stabilized through 2024 right now, so there'll be no spiking. It's not like the excluded debt is down this year and it'll be back up next year. We have enough in the debt exclusion stabilization fund to keep that level to 2024. We could add, about $250,000, and that would bring it down to the 2025 level, saving even more money, if the boards wanted to do that. And I think the only other thing I had was I did provide the update that the school department did send with the school reserves, and that's all I have right now for budget.
So, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No,
Okay.
no questions, go.
So right now, we're at this deficit, based on what you have. I mean, what do you expect to change, or what do you, I know,
Yeah, the state aid, I don't expect any significant changes at this point. The levy, I don't expect any significant changes at this point. I think we've flushed out whatever we can. The only thing that could change would be the excise commitment. I did push it hard last year. I might get another, at the most, maybe 100,000 out of local receipts for that. We've addressed increasing the room tax, the meal tax, and excise. So those were the big increases in the last few years, so I'm not expecting large increases there for this year. I won't know that until the end of February. That's usually when we get that big commitment from the registry. Other than that, there's not a lot of change.
so is it, I mean, you envision the discussion going forward, I mean, this is, you feel pretty solid about this, that rather than talking about adding people, we're gonna be talking about cutting people to balance the budget? I mean, I'm trying to get a feel for where we really are. I know there's a lot of fluctuation still, but we're February now, right? It's not,
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of accounts that could change. Like I said, the excise, I don't think it's gonna,
Not
have a $700,000
right.
change. So, yeah, at this point, we need to start paring the budget down. I will be going through the enrollments for health insurance and seeing where we're at, if there's any trimming that can be done there. I'm nervous about that. There's some big expenses being posted currently for some obligations that we have under health insurance for some injuries. So we might need to augment that account. I'm confident we'll need to augment that account at the annual town meeting or the special town meeting. So those are some of my concerns. I don't see new revenue streams popping up. And again, with the new growth coming in at the same rate as the levy increase that's allowed, it's pretty aggressive, so.
Okay.
How about the other side of the coin? Increases in the deficit brought on by anything that we may be doing, for instance, the compensation study. Is that going to impact this year?
There is a reserve built into this budget for the salary and classification plan. I haven't put it into the department line item budgets until the negotiations are done with all of the collective bargaining units. So it should be fine with what we have.
So our deficit will cover that?
Yes.
It's planned to
It
cover
includes a
it at this
reserve to cover that, yes.
So we won't see this particular deficit go up because of that? Okay.
Can I just ask a question? Is that strictly for union negotiations, or is that for non-union as well?
Non-union as well.
But union, both? It's a combination of both?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else got questions, comments?
Yeah, just, I think this is the place to bring this. So the common septic, is it moved out of capital for, I'm just trying to think of the oranges, excuse me, origins of this, or origins.
The origin?
Get it right. So,
The oranges.
Right now, there's $1.5 million request
Correct.
for the Littleton Common Sewer
Right.
study.
well, this was part of the
design.
capital.
It is part of the capital plan, so it's
Yeah.
not incorporated into the operating budget as of
Okay.
yet.
Is that included in this deficit, though?
No.
No, not at all, right, it's aside of that, okay, got it.
That's in addition to.
No, it's a
It's a
capital.
capital.
It's a one-time
Oh,
capital
one-time
expenditure.
capital.
One time.
The operating budget or the recurring revenue.
Okay.
Any other
We'll see that when we talk about capital, right?
Mr. Galady?
We did have, a bit of a surprise of where that was placed on the prospective warrant last night, because it does reflect changes in a couple. One of it, as we all know, the last time we saw it, it was on the list with the other capital items. And, while it's a sizable expense, it's been voted on by the town affirmatively, so I personally hate to see it continue to get stuck out there with an asterisk next to it, as if it was something out of the norm. But I think the other issue is, I'm not sure why it would be on the special. Realistically, the amount of work that's already been funded for the Weston and Sampson, our consultants, will take them till July 1st. I doubt that they would begin the next phase before that. But if you don't mind, there's a couple of updates on the sewer since we last talked too.
Unless
And,
anybody has any objections.
Yeah, I can try to make it as brief as I'm capable.
Sorry, Joe.
I ruined the bean pot for Joe last night with a little 10.
Your team lost.
Some of the issues that we were really needed to get answers to were on the technical level, while the engineers are doing the conceptual plan, and a couple of the big question marks were related to both we identified them by name, the Sand Park property and the IBM property, which both have existing sewer treatment plants that we wanted to conceivably work into our plan. And we've had, and it's unfair to characterize it as anything more than this, but we've had initial and positive discussions with both parties. In the case of Sand Park, that wasn't so much a surprise. In the case of IBM, we had a tough time even figuring out who to sit down with, because it's owned by a real estate trust. But those were both positive steps. Another technical question mark taken off the table is the testing at the discharge site over by the fields on Air Road. It was done, just last week, Keith? Yes. Yeah.
I think it's still on.
Yeah, last,
It's still ongoing? Okay, but anyways, the flow rates are as wonderful as we thought they would be. So technical questions are coming in at a positive rate, and right now we are very much aware that the next deliverable from our consultants that we are as anxious to see as anybody in the next couple of weeks is some estimates on what the tie-in costs would be for prospective people, but who are within the catchment area that want to participate. And that we understand that we need to have a good month more of lead time before town meeting, so people have a chance to digest that, and believe me, the consultants have heard loud and clear. They don't want to put any number on the table that they can't defend, but by the same token, we have to have numbers to circulate. So that will be hopefully generated by, when do we meet next, Keith? Is it
Friday.
This Friday, some draft figures. If we haven't already done it, we did discuss at our working group level, including you folks, since the last time we had a discussion on this, you guys had questions, we would like to offer a seat at the table to anybody from FinCom or somebody from FinCom to come be a part of the working group, especially at this stage of the game when we move from conceptual plans to financial plans, and it's appropriate. Some of the questions won't come out until the design phase, won't be answered rather until the design phase, but I would think, we very much would like to have
So
somebody
you're
participate.
soliciting us for a representative?
Exactly. To date, the meetings have been largely during the day, but, some of us who are not able to
Someone
make
who's
it.
retired?
Right, well, even Chase and I, we've had to call in, we've done it, by phone too, but because most of the folks are either town employees or the engineers, it's usually Friday morning at 10 so far has been the when we meet. So if somebody wants to join us from FinCom, would love to have a rep. That way we don't have to come back to you every couple of weeks and give you an update. You
Sure,
get it
no, I
yourself.
appreciate that. Board members, anyone interested in signing up?
I'd be interested, but that timeframe doesn't work for
Doesn't
me.
work for me either.
What do you mean, Greg? That's usually when I run into you at the post office.
No, not at 10 on a Friday. 12 on a Friday.
Well, I mean, look, that can be moved. That's just what we've been doing. That's
It
not.
sounds like we've got our volunteer.
Who's that?
Fred's.
Good, good. Might as well start with the guy with the toughest questions anyway, so, we'll-
And with that too, we're looking at expanding and pulling in someone from Light and Water to
Correct.
participate as well. I mean, as it's grown in scope, we need to pull in additional stakeholders to make sure we're accounting for all the various pieces of input that are
Well,
going to be required.
before you accept me, seriously, what I would be looking for basically is a P&L for the sewer commission or company or whatever you guys are calling it, because it is a fairly sizable capital investment
sure it is.
in a relatively small population that it's serving. So I think with a large investment, you've got a significant debt service that a relatively small number of properties, even a couple of big ones thrown in there, are going to have to carry. So that's a concern. Before we go ask the town to spend $1.5 million of its tax money to take the next step. I mean, now we're starting to spend real money. So I think we really need to.
To date, we haven't labeled it a P&L, but the engineers have talked about as a model that works financially, essentially, that the costs pay for the expenses. So, personally, I have no problem, making that part of the deliverables and getting it on the table Monday. Jason, it's a
Yeah.
rephrasing of the demands we were putting on them anyway.
In a way, yeah, that's what we all want now, anyway, from the consultant. Because, I mean, we fully recognize that everyone loves the idea of a sewer until we start talking about what it's gonna cost. I mean, everyone wants to sign up in principle, no one wants to run their own septic system. We're fully aware of the
But if that's
fact
what
that
you're
the
running
dollars are
into,
what's gonna drive it.
that's.
But we also have seen nothing yet that has driven us away from, believe me, you'd hear it, because it would be a complete recasting of this, from two main principles. One is it's opt-in, and two is it pays for itself. So those are two guiding posts here. So, and that's not, that's not unheard of. Systems do that.
So if you don't have enough folks that opt into it, you could really shift a lot of the burden on very few, potentially.
Well, and that's part of why, what we're looking at is, what does the phasing of this system look like when it's installed technically? Because what we're confident of is even if we design a 300 million, or a 300,000 gallon system, we're not gonna get 300,000 gallons on day one. Rather, it's, day one, perhaps if we got 100,000 gallons, we could make that work on day one. 4 years later, maybe hypothetically right now, we bring phase 2 online, and then maybe a few years after that, we bring phase 3 online, which allows us to, A, spread out the costs a little bit, B, allows certain users to opt in on a schedule and timeline that works for them. And C, it allows us to demonstrate the efficacy of the system on a smaller scale without necessarily taking on the 300,000 gallon risk right out of the gate.
Sense.
And even as the layman, I understand too that a couple of these big customers carry a lot of the small customers, and that's why we were particularly happy about the early conversations with the two parties I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, with respect to the two parties, one of the real showstoppers here would have been if we had sat down with IBM and said, oh, that's great, I wish we had known about that 2 weeks ago, we just installed a brand-new $5 million system, but in fact, what we got from them was essentially the opposite. Hey, we've had some problems with it recently, it's operating, but we wouldn't mind to not be in the sewer business. So as far as timing goes, Sam Parkin might have been a good conversation to have 6 years ago.
Nonetheless, he's
4
still
years
happy
ago.
to see us take over,
Yeah.
in an appropriate format. And on IBM, a new system might allow for some expansion of activity on the site for them too, which they are interested in.
Nice.
Is that accurate?
I think that's reasonably accurate, to the extent that the property manager was able to sort of give us an idea of what they might be.
I'll settle for reasonably accurate.
So is the sewer district essentially the same as it was 4 or 5 years ago?
Good question. No, and that's, well, it's essentially yes, but when it was proposed before, at least the map that was floating around, incorporated nothing more dramatic than the overlay district zone for the common area, the two zones. But what it didn't capture was a lot of people who, were residences just outside the district saying, well, I'd love to hook up, but we're not in the map. Well, there's nothing magic to that, so we have toyed with the map, and we've at the fringes and added in properties essentially where we had levels of interest. Plus, one significant logical addition, since the complex we're in right now is already sewered and will naturally be a part of it, we did carry the previously mapped district down King Street to this point with the intersection at Shattuck Street, so that this is included as well.
And right now, the district that's been proposed as of a month or two ago is still flexible. To a large extent, it's contingent upon what's the discharge capacity that we can get underneath the high school fields, if that's where the discharge location ultimately lies. If for some reason we find out we can only get 250,000 gallons instead of 300,000, the district gets rejiggered a little bit accordingly.
And we've prudently pruned a couple of things that the engineers would have included that may have made agricultural property that were not currently under that a lot more attractive if it was sewered, and it's not in our proposal. So we're not looking to expand the commercial base as much as we are looking to serve and make more valuable the existing commercial base, and serve the residents there and address the underlying environmental problem.
Any other comments, thoughts? Thank you. Thanks for the update. Okay. Back to you, Bonnie, sorry.
I just didn't know if the school committee wanted to comment on the materials that they had provided. I put in your packet.
Certainly willing to answer questions. I mean, the only comment I would have initially is that the amount that we have represented in the level service budget is not a new number. It's the correct number we talked about the different items that are driving our budget request overall back in December, and it's just how we want to portray that as level service versus additional resources. And the number that you see there is what we would clearly classify as level servicing for the district going into FY19.
Yeah, I think this has been more of a conversation of what the school department is seeing as level staffing, the definition of. So I think that's been kind of where it is. The number is still the number, but I just don't think everybody was on board with what is level staffing? Are we including, I was unaware that we were going to include, the busing contract, for instance. It just didn't.
Yeah, like I said,
that would be part
yeah,
of level
right.
staffing.
Yeah.
But I understand now
Right.
why it would be, but
Right.
it's just, the language hasn't always been matched up
Right.
when we're trying to figure out the
Yeah,
budget.
level staffing is just, for us, is not it's a non-starter in terms of accuracy, because a much higher percentage of our budget goes beyond staffing.
Right.
I mean, we have so many expenses that go beyond the human resource capital, which isn't necessarily the same as is represented in other departments in the town. So, we just need to make sure we're all understand that level service concept is the one that we jump off with. It has to be, it simply has to be.
I still think there's room for maybe policy that can define this a little bit better across the board. And that goes with, when we're talking about negotiating, I'll use the busing contract, I keep coming back to it. Are we basing it off the first year of the contract or the last year of the contract when we're looking at level staffing? Things like that. I mean, if we look at the contract itself, that might be a lot higher or lower than the last year of the contract, what we're trying to base it off. I don't know. That's just one example.
Yeah, I mean, the way that the busing contract works is when it jumps, and then it sits there for ostensibly for the duration of the contract. There are some kickers in there that fortunately we haven't had to incur in past contracts.
In either case, we'd be presenting for next year's budget the cost of what we need to be providing for services, not a random number off the contract.
And again, the important thing to keep remember is it's the same level of service. It's the same 8 buses, 3 runs a day. We haven't added buses, we haven't added runs. We're just level servicing what we have been providing, in that particular line item for many, many years.
So, Bonnie, what number do you have in the numbers you presented for the schools? Do you have the 1,070,000, or do you have the?
$1,070,000
You've got the 1,070,000 in there.
in the first version of the budget, the
The 600,
required services.
in the $600,000 deficit, okay. Okay.
So we're all on the same sheet of music.
Yes.
All right, anything else? Any other comments? You're good for now?
Let's go to capital.
No, can I make some comments?
Sure. You got a notebook full of comments over there?
No, not a notebook full, I just,
To the coast?
we're agreeing,
He's beaming him what to say.
Betsy had asked the question about, where are we at? If we're a $600,000 deficit, where are we prepared to make cuts, or what can we live without, essentially, is what we're gonna get down to, right? And looking at some of these things, and I'm gonna put Mike on the spot here, with some personnel. Of the 3 positions that you're looking to add, the schools are looking to add, I would be interested in having a conversation about the assistant principal at Shaker Lane, and the basis for it. And I think we've had some conversations around the math science specialist and the benefits that we've seen come from that, and the fact that you lost one and you're trying to fill that position. And computer science and math at the high school, I know has been a tough position for her to fill. But as far as the new position of assistant principal at Shaker Lane, I'd like to have some conversation around that.
Yeah, so, before I get into the priority of those particular staff requests, I just want to make sure we're all clear that those are not in the $600,000 deficit number. That would be additive to that if we were going to contemplate adding that staffing. And then in terms of, why that particular staffing position is there, we've seen over the last, say, 5 or 6 years, a significant increase in mandates from the state and federal government in what we do in those buildings every day beyond the classroom. We have educator evaluation that goes on now that's done by our admin team. We have a lot more programming and reporting requirements regarding bullying. And there's other aspects of that need to be done by the administration, not by the classroom teachers. So what we're finding is that it's stressing the ability of all the principals that don't have an assistant principal in the building, because that's primarily what our assistant principals focus their day-to-day duties on, is discipline in the building and those types of administrative things. And then that frees up the principal to stay focused on the longer-term planning. That's a key component of that person's job. So what we're looking to do is to make sure that we have our principal at Shaker Lane, and preferably, someday down the road at Russell Street, because those are the 2 buildings that don't currently have assistant principals, that we're making sure that our principals have the balance to deal with their own day-to-day, because they won't be removed from day-to-day operations, they'll always have a part of that, but to make sure that they're able to focus on long-term planning, professional development, curriculum development, evaluation of student performance, things like that. That's why that's on there. In terms of where we are in a budget situation, we clearly recognize that, maybe that is something that is going to give sooner than some of the other things that we're asking for. And that's part of the process, for sure.
So Mike, just a follow-up question here. So this deficit that we have for the schools does not include any of the staffing requests?
Not those three
Not
particulars.
these three particular ones, it's everything else, just so I'm clear. Just want to make sure.
Yeah. The number that Bonnie has in that model, that was at 1.07,
Yep.
is everything except for those three particular staffing positions that we presented back in December.
Okay, got it, thank you. Chuck, anything else?
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be further robust conversations around that position. And from our perspective, we were talking about the facilities position, that would be something that, we're gonna have some conversations around that and look at the value in that right now, and in all likelihood, would be willing to push that out until January 1st as a hire, then we've cut that, the expense will be cut in half, at least for this year. But we have to look at, we're up against it right now, so we have to make a determination as to whether or not we're prepared to go forward with that facilities position now, and get it budgeted for, or, do we hold it off to the fall and then maybe look to seat somebody by January 1st, which would, give us some cost benefit. But, yeah, in looking over this, those were a couple of the items that I felt we could have further conversations around.
So Bonnie, to be clear on the rest of the staffing requests, are they included in your budget as well, or no?
In the
They're
mission
outside,
budget,
right?
the staffing requests are included. In the
In
level staffing
level
and
staffing,
A,
they're not.
they're not.
Just want to make sure I'm clear on it,
Yep.
that's all.
So none of those are in the $700,000 deficit.
No.
They're already not there.
Excuse me, Mike, the one line item that I guess I would question whether it's at all discretionary or not would be the 150 that you have in there for the increase towards the all-day kindergarten. I know that was a policy decision that you guys made, was it last year?
Last year was our first year, now we're into,
Time,
right.
moving and
Yep,
moving.
yep.
But if
Five-year.
Five-year plan.
5-year phase-out, yeah.
push really came to shove,
I mean,
Is
in
that
the memo
something-
that I sent last week, there was a breakdown of how much we're spending in staffing and how much we're projecting to take in tuition as we phase out the tuition or lower it year by year.
Saw that, yeah.
And, and there is, we will continue to take in some money for the next couple of years. So that is something we could, because when we did it last year, we really supported it through school choice. It wasn't something that we were able to fit into the increase in appropriation. So as we look at our school choice and other revolving accounts, we could certainly contemplate those kind, now whether it's for full-day kindergarten tuition or however we wanted to divvy it up.
Right.
That's certainly something that we're going to consider as we go through this process and try to figure out what are our strategies, as a town for trying to get where we think we need to be.
Yeah.
In all departments. But, yeah, for sure.
and just for clarification, the sped number, that's always a bit of a crapshoot.
Right.
And is this increased cases or just?
And so, what, for the increase that we have in there, hold on a second, I printed that one off this afternoon. So what we have in there is, we have about $2.5 million that we have quantified as our current student population that are receiving out-of-district services. We estimated a 3% tuition rate increase from our providers, which is about a $76,000 increase. We put a $70,000 increase in there on the assumption that we would have either more students to provide or the current students might need more services beyond what they're currently getting. And then backed out the appropriated budget that we currently have, plus what we expect to get for circuit breaker, and then the difference is that $167,000, almost $168,000.
Okay.
So that's how that's quantified.
Bonnie, is there any danger that circuit breaker or any of the other state funds that flow to the schools are going to fall?
What did we estimate the
Just
current reimbursement
Like
rate?
the town side of 70 grand
65%?
lower.
Yeah.
Right. So right now, our assumption is that the state is gonna fund circuit breaker at 65% of the way their model works,
Right,
which
right.
is that a reduction?
Yeah, so circuit breaker works, we get reimbursed
Right.
this year for expenses from last year.
Right.
So.
But at a percentage of-
Right, so we do the application, we submit that, they audit the expenses, and then the state says, we're gonna reimburse every district at some percentage. In prior years, that percentage has been anywhere from 70 to 73. The state mandate said 75%, but they never reached that. So it's been 70%, 73%. This year, the reimbursement rate has dropped to 65%.
Okay.
Instead of, last year, we were reimbursed at 73%, so this year is 65%. So that reduction in that rate equates to about a $90,000 difference in less circuit breaker revenue that we'll take in this year.
And that's already reflected in what we've done.
Okay.
So the question you're asking is, do we anticipate it going lower than 65%?
I didn't know
At the
that.
moment, we don't,
Right.
but.
I didn't know that.
I mean, 6 or
you
7
had a-
years
you had
ago,
a
we were getting
defined
reimbursed at
percentage,
40%,
that's all.
so
Right, okay.
it goes up and down with the state, so.
Okay, so you, as far as we know, it's accounted for?
Yes.
That's the question.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else regarding school? Questions, comments, anything you want to add? Got it covered?
No, not at the moment. I mean, we recognize, just as well as everybody else, what we're looking at.
Bonnie, we got anything else we want to review at this point? Or are we ready to
Capital.
move over to capital? Okay, capital it is.
So there's been a few changes to the capital plan that you reviewed at your last meeting. So I'll just kind of highlight the changes. We had about 4.8 million in requests. Last year, we appropriated about 2.5, almost 2.6 million for capital. So for this year, we are actually looking at what we have for available funds is $2,474,151 to spend on capital. It's made up primarily from 3 different accounts. The first is undesignated fund balance or free cash, looking at 1.1 million coming from that. And that's just, it's a 2.5% of the operating budget calculation, so it gets updated each year. Some of the capital requests are being funded by other accounts outside of the general fund, and those total $191,150, primarily the LCTV, PEG Access Fund, and Clean Lakes. And then we have money that is inside the levy that is used for capital, $1,121,000, which is accumulated retired debt service. So as we pay down our existing debt schedule, we don't let that money flow into the operating budget, we reserve it and we use it for capital. So what we have available is the $1,121,000. So it's a good, situation. It's almost $2.5 million that's available in accordance with our financial policies. So with these calculations, what we did was put together a capital plan that funded $3.8 million in total expenditures. Was the difference, it's a borrowing authorization that we would be looking to see. Now, I know that this will probably be discussed as an alternative later in the evening, but at this point, we're looking at $3.8 million in funding. So where is the funding going to? So we're looking at a combination of 2.3 million in cash out expenditures and $1.5 million in long-term debt, which would be for the sewer project. The items that have changed within this scope is the ladder truck. Last version, I had it funded through a combination of like 3 different areas: debt, reserves, and an appropriation from cash. In this version, we're applying for a grant for the ladder truck. It's a $200,000 local match, so we're funding the $200,000 in a local match, and we're crossing our fingers that we get the grant for the balance of $1 million to actually fund the truck.
And what would be the timing of the grant? I mean, is it within FY18 or?
The grant has been submitted
next year.
It would be in the fall, next fall,
This coming fall?
or, yeah,
Fall of 18?
That's right.
It's the awarding of the grant.
the awarding, right?
Okay.
Okay, so it could hit fiscal 19 then.
Potentially.
Could
Fiscal
hit.
19
Yeah,
is when,
could- yeah.
the fall, so.
So it comes in the fall, if we award it, and we didn't have to find it.
But that's 200,000 of the 1.2 million for the truck.
Is in this plan.
It's in this plan.
Yes, instead of the full 1.2 million being included in the plan, with drawing down some capital stabilization money and,
And now it's just 1 million. No problem, Scott.
well, no, it's 200,000 on our end,
It's 200 grand.
Why, no, wait a minute.
It's like a dump truck.
and 1 million grand.
Huh?
It's 200,000.
That's what I
on that.
didn't understand.
Yes, we would fund 200,000 of it, and the grant would cover 1 million. if
Oh,
we-
okay,
if
see,
it's
I
not-
thought it was the other way around, that's why I was like, what?
Yeah, that's what I
Sorry, no, no.
It's a great grant. It's a fantastic grant.
So, actually, the grant, the maximum you can apply for in the grant is $1 million. So we applied for the $1 million with a minimum of $200,000 match. Typically, it's a 5% match, that's what's required. But if you increase the match, it increases your opportunity, your eligibility for the grant. So we increased the match with some higher hopes. And, but it would be at a minimum of the 200,000. So with the maximum offset of the 1 million, the grant would potentially fund 800,000 of that, whereas we would pick up the rest.
So Chief, they could come back and say they only fund so much of it with the grant instead of the full
You
1
don't
million?
either get it or you don't.
Or you get it or you
Yeah,
don't?
yeah,
So there's no-
it's yea or nay.
Okay, so it's not a percentage of it, got it.
And who is funding this? Who would? FEMA?
Yep.
And I would argue that if, in the event that they came back and they said, sorry, your number wasn't up this time, that $200,000 be earmarked towards the eventual purchase of a piece of apparatus.
Leave it in the article.
Leave it in the article.
until
Right.
We just
assemble the rest of the money.
hold it.
Right, and this is an annual grant, which we can put in for, correct? But, like you said, this has been kicked down the road quite a ways already, so.
Yeah.
We've applied to this grant and been denied before.
Zero.
So we just gotta keep it.
Keep our fingers crossed. Come on, FEMA.
So if anybody knows anybody at FEMA,
You know a guy?
up and down,
He just retired.
he's got friends. Stick to it.
Sorry, you go ahead.
So that was the major change on the fire department. I would highlight that the Park and Rec department has put in two applications to CPC for funding. The bathhouse at 400,000 and field development at 100,000. I don't know whether CPC will be funding both of them, parts of them, all of them. But if they do not, and it is a desire to move forward, we will need to secure funding for those. So it's something that could come back.
Those are in the recreation buckets, right? Or
Right now,
bucket.
there's like about 300.
Yeah,
About 300 in the rec?
290 and change, yeah.
There's a few bucks in undesignated that could be.
So there's
used.
there enough to cover both projects
Well,
in
out of,
CPC?
I mean,
Not out of CPC.
yeah, I mean, you'd have to look at next year's money for CPC. You'd have to look at the fiscal 19 money coming in, and then, I mean, it would really,
We're also looking at putting money, there's the ability to put money into the blended CPA fund too, although we only have, you know, about maybe 180,000 this year to put in, compared to fully funding it at, you know, over 400,000. We've used all the mitigation funds and put them into the blended CPA thus far. We put $1 million of 15 Great Road Mitigation Fund in there, and all that's left is about 168,000 from a potpourri group, host community agreement. But if you wanted to piece together a $400,000 project, one of them you probably
You could do one, but not
but
both.
you can't do both.
Got it.
So is that $400,000 predicated on a contractor coming in, or is it predicated on VOTEC students building the project?
Right, we talked.
Yeah.
I
They
don't
haven't
remember.
designed, it hasn't been
Yeah.
designed yet,
Yeah.
so I think the number is the higher of the two. That
That's my
maybe they can come in, for certainly they could come in for lower if they line up the VOTEC.
Okay. Any other
Yes, that's
comments?
per contractor, definitely.
Yeah, that was a discussion, I know we had talked about the parking lot, they were really gonna work that.
So that will be developing as we go forward. The other change from the last update was just at the sewer feasibility and design, just making sure that it was set at $1.5 million. I did have it earmarked as a borrowing authorization. You know, if it's not a borrowing authorization, then we would need to look at whether we're willing to draw down some reserves to do that. Borrowing authorization is a different vote. It wouldn't appear in the same article that we normally put all of the capital items together because it's not cash, and a borrowing requires a 2/3 vote. So if it is borrowing, it will be segregated separately.
So what is the selectmen's desire on that?
The board wants a transfer, not borrow.
Say that again?
The transfer of funds rather than borrowing. And
So we want to take
We're
$1.5 million out of savings rather than borrow.
Well, the borrowing for the actual construction project makes sense logically because it's a long-term project. This is not long-term, it's.
So the selectmen are expecting that the sewer commission will pay back the town the $1.5 million that it's fronting for the project.
If the project goes, it's all reimbursable.
The plan is, right, even the money that's been expended
To date.
to date should be reimbursable as, by the sewering district.
Okay.
Once it
With interest?
You can count those expenses in the amount that, for
Fig,
which
we call it
betterment is made, that the design costs as well as the construction costs can go towards the total amount of the betterment, which is then levied against the properties that connect to the sewer.
Yeah.
So it is an eligible cost. We can get it back, whether you borrow or raise it or appropriate the money.
Are there any concerns about if we just take it out of the bank, that it's going to affect our bond rating?
Well,
Just make sure you're following your
Your policies.
overall spending follows your fund
Policy,
policies.
right, I mean, it's
So it's just, you just gotta, it's really a matter of priority. If the desire is to transfer the funds for this particular project, then you do that first, then you add up all the other ones that you're proposing to transfer fund balances and see where that gets you. And if it gets you over your line, then something lower in the list of priorities is gonna give.
This
I'm
may
thinking
be-
this on the fly, but I asked this of Bonnie and Keith. If we did follow that course for the design money in the spring, could we in fact roll the design money into borrowing, into the anticipated borrowing in the fall for the construction? So if the design phase is approved, because there's ultimately going to be a borrowing involved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I defer to Bonnie, but I think my recollection is that the answer would be, depends on whether you've spent, we will not have set the tax rate by then, so.
right.
If you, and we're not raising and appropriating anyway, so.
Yeah, go back and modify it.
You just go back at the fall town meeting, you do two things. You would borrow for the construction, but you'd also go back and amend the source of funding for.
Yeah, I don't want to unduly make it complicated, but if we
No,
can
no,
roll it
but-
all into
no,
one
there's a way to
package.
do it.
yeah.
No. There's a way to do it, and this is the team that.
Okay.
So this may have been covered previously, but what town department levies and collects the connection fees?
So, remember when I said we were looking at pulling light and water in?
Yeah.
That's a big part of that question right now, is how that would be routed and bringing light and water in is.
The default answer, until and unless town meeting votes otherwise, is the Board of Selectmen, as far as who is authorized to do it. The Board of Selectmen would be authorized to do it. How do you do it mechanically? That, under any circumstances, is the discussion that we need to work out with the water department.
Sure.
Because typically would be piggybacking the sewer bill on the water bill.
They're the logical
It would be
We
logical.
wouldn't want to set up two
We don't want to
redundant
do it,
systems.
and they're set up to do it, and there's, we just need to get them engaged on. But we're, as we say, we're looking to enter the design phase, so that's the phase we'd kind of like to get them involved in.
The issue gets at governance of the sewer system and like who's in, who's out, and that's Board of Select, just to put a plug in, I would hope that that would continue to be the Board of Selectmen making the decision rather than cede that to another separately elected board that is not really, been involved in the process.
We haven't had that conversation.
Yeah, we have, but that's the governance issue that you have.
I've been at this for 20 years, frankly, I wouldn't mind if we get the thing built, pass it off to somebody else. Okay, go and have fun with it, but there might be good reasons to keep it in-house.
Maybe the company that's gonna be doing the billing for the ambulance. Roll in the sewer. No? Sure.
I think, no, somehow the answer, to get this information out a little bit more, I don't want, just as a resident, I'm learning a lot just today from what you're talking about, and I want to make sure that everybody gets to hear some of this, because you don't want this to die on the vine by, just based on the fact people just don't know.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a good faith risk we're taking, to some extent, but the reward on the other end is beneficial, and that's the message we definitely got to keep pushing, because
And to your,
there's, no,
I'm sorry, I
please.
didn't mean to interrupt you. To your point about messaging, so,
Yeah,
like I said, everyone loves the idea until we get the dollars
right.
on the table, right? And so, as far as messaging goes, as soon as we're confident, fully confident that we've got dollars to a point that we can bring them out, we're not gonna bring out, the first draft is not gonna be the permanent number, it's gonna
Yeah.
change a little bit, I guarantee it. But once we have a reasonably confident number, we expect that in the next handful of weeks, we intend to do a number of public meetings to convey this information and really paint the whole picture, everything from the design funding, which we'll be voting on at this town meeting, through the construction funding, the districting, the administration, all of that, so that we can.
We have had the engineers in periodically, as we have significant new information to share, as we did about a month ago, and I think at that point, the new number on the table was the overall anticipated cost of the system, which is, 30 to something, 30 to 36 million dollars. Boiling that down to, how it works at a household by household level, that's the next number to come in. In truth, we have not spent a lot of time yet in exploring how the mechanics of the operations would go, although we've had it at the back of our mind, and we've discussed it publicly with members of the Light and Water Board and privately, that, they're the logical place to go for operating it, because they already do that sort of thing. And, but this is a very complicated project, so we do it in pieces. So we're right now, let's keep track of where we're at. We're in the phase now where we're coming forward asking for design money. We're not even at that point yet.
And let me address the 36 as well. So one of the hallmarks of this system is the energy recovery component of it. So it would be a mistake to take 36, divide it by the amount of flow, and say that's going to be the betterment fee. In fact, that would be a very wrong approach, because of the income streams that are anticipated as part of this system, selling off those utilities and the energy that's harvested. So a lot of that feeds back into that cost to ultimately pay a big chunk of that 36 back. If you ask me how much, I can't tell you right
But it's
now.
still a message we have to keep getting out there, because it's not
Because people are
known.
gonna
That
think
piece
that.
right there is the part that I think everyone needs to realize, that I don't think that many people do. That's,
I would be surprised if less than half of you up there weren't taking 36, dividing it and going, how do we make 36 work? And we don't make 36 work as a pure capital cost. It only works if there's an income stream.
So you say that everybody's on board with this plan. I was part of the original sewer study committee, and at that time, there was a very vehement group opposed to the sewer. There was no proponent, but there was an opponent. Have they gone away, or?
I hope we didn't, nobody said, everybody's on board with it, but we have had public meetings, and the dialogue have been more pointed questions about operations cost, et cetera, rather than flat-out opposition. I mean, could it still be out there somewhere? Yeah, but not as, and it wasn't, frankly, it wasn't there as vociferously at the two town meetings where we voted the funding to get us to this point for the engineers. Questions, sharp questions and some opposition, absolutely it's out there, but, to date, majorities have been there to carry the vote, and, the expectations increase at each stage, and we're very mindful of where we're at right now. We need to come in with a, with a proposal that, for design costs that at least share what the anticipated hookup costs and how it's going to look financial are, in addition to just what the layout of the systems,
Yeah, well, when we used to have those public meetings, there was a very vocal opposition.
We've been spared that over the past year, but
Oh, good. That's
doesn't mean it
good to
couldn't
hear.
come back.
Yeah.
And Paul's right, there have been sharp, pointed questions, principally on how much is this gonna cost me to hook up?
But there
frankly,
was a
we-
lot of misinformation presented previously.
Right, and we take those pointed questions about how much is this gonna cost to be good for the most part. I mean, people want this to happen as long as they can afford it. And that's how we understood the public feedback that we've gotten so far. As long as it's affordable and as long as it makes sense for the town as well as the
Environment,
the ratepayer.
Hey, we haven't even we haven't even spent a whole lot of time in the past year anyways, focused on, if it is operational, what it's gonna mean to revenue generation, So we're just right now focusing on a working system that is self-sustaining and solves an environmental problem. But when we start talking about how the point money is capping off and drying up, the next source of significant commercial revenue is gonna come, hopefully, from increased valuation on currently developed properties gaining in value.
Sorry, this has sort of turned into a survey.
No, I don't think, yeah.
Very important.
Important stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Any other comments? Capital, anything else, Lonnie? Any other changes that we missed?
The only other thing is if I will put together a funding plan with $1.5 million as an appropriation rather than a borrowing authorization. It would impact the following paragraph that we show additional reserve appropriations, where we have about $700,000 available in additional free cash, plus about $2 million that would be appropriated to reserves. So, as Keith said, we need to follow our financial policies and appropriate that money into the reserve accounts first, because bond counsel follows that to the letter. They pull the policy out and they want to see all the appropriations and make sure that we did everything that we said we were going to do. You can, in the same town meeting, then appropriate it out for a project. So I will map that through and just show what that might look like going forward. But we could do it. It's just, it would draw down the reserves.
So this will directly impact the reserves?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
So instead of like just over 2 million, we'd have about half a mil.
It's like a good faith.
I have another question
Okay.
for facility study. You show 893,000 for facility study recommendations, working on various systems around town. Am I to understand when you say include 600,000, that we're really only putting 293,000 into facilities?
Correct.
Yep.
Of that 600.
I rather suspect, because I haven't looked at it, I haven't been involved in that in the last 2 or 3 years, but that's a come down from where we were when we first started this project.
That's correct.
We had the study done, we looked at all the things that the study told us we should be doing every year. We never had enough money to do all of it, but we at least made a huge stab at it, at least the first 2 or 3 years. This is, what, a third of what we put into it 3 or 4 years ago. Are we just ignoring the fact again, and we're going to have a school that has an entire heating system like the old school we had on Russell Street that just falls apart, the classrooms are dripping water because we're not putting the money in the facilities? To shortcut facilities, to demolish a building that's been sitting there for ever since I've lived in town. It'll probably sit there till I'm gone. I question the wisdom of doing that.
Did somebody talk to
Is
that?
there a need for that? I mean, does it have to come down for any specific reason?
I don't know, Chris brought it up, it was a recommendation, and it includes, I think, $40,000 in abatement.
Asbestos.
So this,
Yeah,
Well, that falls under PMBC, right?
it does, yeah.
Facilities infrastructure?
Yep.
Are you guys buying that $283,000 number?
It's low,
It's very low.
yeah.
so Chris was planning on raising the building because there's no useful life left in it, as you've mentioned, Alan. When he started getting estimates for doing it, realized that it's not, that you can't just knock it down and fire hose on it and cart it away. There's hazardous materials there, it's asbestos and who knows what else. So that's.
And it's adjacent to a well.
Well, it's
all
within
sorts
area
of-
A of the,
Yeah.
right, so there's,
No, that may be all true, I understand that.
But I'm
But
with
my
you.
point is,
I have it down here as well. that
if nobody's
spend
telling
that
us you
now-
gotta take it down tomorrow, we're gonna
Right.
fine you $1 million, then I think we should rethink it. If you think it absolutely has to come down, let's find some other way to fund it. We find ways to fund all kinds of funny stuff that shows up every time we sit down at this table.
Well, Peter,
So let's not fund it on the back of facilities spending, okay?
So you're saying, take it out of the facilities and just put it as its own?
I don't care how you do it. I don't care if you do it.
so there's
But what
no-
I'm saying is, we're shortchanging the money we should be spending on our facilities, and I don't think we should do it to take down a building.
Without a plan of like
Without a
structure,
plan.
rebuilding of something there. We just-
And at PMBC, I would like to see you guys take another look at this, because we've got time, and tell me if I'm wrong that we're shortchanging.
You're not wrong.
Okay, then come up with another number, and let's find another way to take down this building.
Put a fence around it and let it come down on its own.
That's all I have, sir.
You know, it prompts me to think, a couple of times in the past, we had buildings to take down, the fire department was interested in controlled burns. What do you think, chief?
No way you can do it.
Can't do it there?
That's gonna be asbestos.
Can't blame a guy for trying.
Oh, boy.
If it was to burn down, how would you do it?
It sounds like, Bonnie, Mr. McCray's asking that we can move that around a little bit.
What I'll do is I'll hold the number at 893 and then just ask PMBC to get me a new list of projects that would cover. Or, you know, if it's a different number, then we'll adjust it. But
So how soon do we have to come up with that?
the warrant closes.
Tomorrow.
I mean, you have $600,000 in another project.
Yeah, March 12th.
We don't have any that we've particularly identified. I mean, there are a lot of projects out there. We don't have any current estimates on them. All the estimates are like 5 years old.
Yeah.
And some of them, like the boiler at the high school, the estimate was to replace the innards, and they decided to just replace the entire boiler. So it went from like a $20,000 to a $70,000 project. So we need to make sure that the scopes are accurate and then have a reasonable estimate to work with.
Mr. Burden?
I think that if we're in agreement on that the total number is, should be made available for the projects by the PMBC, we can do that right now. I mean,
Right.
that the language that we would have in the capital item, in the omnibus article, does not specify X dollars for this project, X dollars for that
Yeah,
project.
I'm all
It's a
on
bu-
board with that.
It's a bottom line, so, you know, they should take the time that they need to get the estimates, but know, to Alan's point, that we're putting into it the total amount of money that keeps faith with the plan. And so we could take that, we can put that number in, we can take the building demolition out, and we'll revisit that at a,
Yeah, we typically what we do, we put together a list of projects, identify them by types, whether it's life safety, ADA, building envelope, et cetera. Then we meet with a representative from the selectmen, and we prioritize that, and we come to an agreement, come up to a total, and then that's how we arrive at it.
I would be a little bit concerned about just including the appropriation at 893 without having gone through that exercise, at least to a degree, to understand what we're asking for. Sure, if we pull $600,000 out for the garage without knowing what we're gonna backfill that with, we could put ourselves in a situation where we're doing things that we don't, that are less needs and more wants.
Well, does it have to be used for facilities? That's the question I have.
If it's appropriate.
if it's in, if it's in.
Okay, so I was saying, we got, take 400,000 and put it towards the fire truck.
No.
Well, so if you're spending the $400,000, I want to say my piece.
We're talking a safety issue.
But
That's why I'm in deficit. on the
But
capital.
Did PMBC go through that drill?
We went through it for the items that, outside of the $600,000.
You did?
Yeah.
With the selectmen and with the stakeholders? Like we did, like we used to do when I used to be on this?
Yeah, I believe we did, yeah.
Am I wrong?
About what?
No.
No, what's the, I guess the damage in kicking it down the road a year?
The building?
2, 3, 4, without a plan, I guess, to put something there, to utilize that space, what's the?
Right.
Yeah, if we had a pressing need to park the school buses there, for instance, and we needed to clear that building in
Yeah.
order to make the space and put a pole up and have a structure put there
Or
for Helen's office.
There's an effluent disposal beds.
And I had even raised the possibility of maybe putting a field in that location, but it's not large enough. So if we could knock it down and put a field there, maybe that's a benefit, but it's not.
But the plan's not there.
Are there any
Right.
health and safety concerns with just keeping it there? Is it a problem or not?
It's
I mean,
fenced in.
it's-
It's
fenced and so on,
to
so
the best of my
there-
knowledge, there's no public safety issue unless it's
Way off the
someone from
road, it's
highway
all by
going into the
itself.
building.
I've seen it in there. It's not really an eyesore too much because it sits so far back and you don't even.
You don't even see it.
So
I mean, I would say the only concern would be that you don't want it to come down under its.
On its own.
And it-
Yeah,
it's
and then you got a
starting to-
mess to clean up, it becomes an
Yeah, the roof is
emergency.
starting to cave in on it.
Is it?
Yeah.
How many years did we kick the salt shed down the road before we finally did that one?
Well, that's on the want list this year.
It is.
It went from a $20,000 ask about 5 years ago. Currently, it's $40,000.
Yeah, it starts getting expensive.
I'd suggest that we agree to have a discussion item at the selectmen's meeting on March 12th to finalize what the plan is. We can keep the money, the need for the money isn't gonna go away, and at the end of the night, we will either be spending it on over here or over there, because all the needs exist. But
And it's
we
all
can at least know-
appropriation, right?
Yeah, it's all appropriation, at least we can know what the plan, we can all be in agreement on what the plan is before the warrant closes.
That sounds fair. You okay with that, Alan?
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Oh, go ahead.
jump in, since
Sure.
We're kind of down this road.
We're trying to
So,
put together a-
one of the things, I have to, my hat's off to the chief for getting the application in for that grant, and, you know, that.
The ladder truck.
That not being on the budget this year has helped in a lot of areas. One of the things that absolutely has to be paid for next year, it's the last year that we have in order to replace all the SCBA, the breathing apparatuses for the whole department. That's to the tune of about $260,000.
It's about 260 to 280. We're working on trying to get a final number. The issue is that after next year, the bottles expire. We're not unable to retest them. They've outlived their useful life. So that is on the capital
Yeah,
budget
that's
for next
important.
year. But if we kick the ladder down the road another year, now we're pitting one against the other, and one is, we have to replace it. We tried the grant for that last year, and that was unsuccessful. So next year is our drop dead year to replace that system.
So we either have to absolutely 100% commit to paying for those 260 to 280 next year, or put them on this year and check that off the list, so we don't have to worry about it. It comes off the capital.
So is it your
Or put some
thought?
away, if there's some here to do, we could put it away for next year as well, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're just trying to get it out on the
Right.
table, so next year is the drop
Yep.
dead day, we have to get that done. Alan, I had the demolition on there as well. One of the things that I'd like to see us do is, we've got the space needs study back, where we've got a lot of, we've identified a lot of needs, we're in the process of seeding. We're gonna need someone from your committee to be seated on this as well.
Fred?
So it's a working group for the space needs, which is gonna have, stakeholders involved, and taking a look at what the needs are and how we address the needs and what the cost is going to be, and, what the impact is and how we pay for it, that kind of thing. One of the things that we've been talking about kicking the can down the road, is addressing the needs of elder and human services in a senior center. So if we're looking at putting money aside, whether it be for a ladder truck or any number of things, we need to address the needs of the seniors. And if it's just earmarking a couple $100,000 this year so that we have it available in order to do something as we, if we identify an opportunity for Park and Rec to go somewhere else, or, Indian Hill a couple years down the road becomes an opportunity for us, where maybe the school department moves in there and they, I don't know what it is exactly, but I think the seniors have been extremely patient with, at least with our board.
Right.
And I feel an obligation to put some money aside so that we are able to do something, so that if we do come up with a plan to be able to serve the seniors the way that, beyond what we're doing currently, I want to have that money available to us without it having a huge impact on the taxpayer.
You're referring to a shorter-term plan as opposed to a longer-term plan, expansion and things like that. This is more,
Yes, I think that on the short, so that's exactly what the working group is going to be looking at, Gary, thank you. So we're going to come up with short-term plans as well as a long-term plan, and I think on the short term, we need to find a way to better meet the needs of our seniors, and with the longer-term plan in mind. And that may be a complete redevelopment here, if the library goes on the hill, or if we redo, put an addition off the back and all services are handled in this facility, or if we buy a piece of property and build a campus, any one of those. But on the short term, I think there needs to be, we need to be better about creating that plan on a short-term basis, and I'd like to find a way for us to put some money aside. So, we're talking about appropriating monies in reserve.
Okay. But you got a volunteer here.
At least a portion for the working group.
Mr. Wilson says he's gonna volunteer.
Step outside with a sword later. And
some ideas.
So I'm not being prescriptive as to what that number needs to be tonight, but I think that it is something that we, as a board, are very concerned with, and we want to make sure that it's put forward. And it's one of our goals, and it is a number that we do expect to be in the budget this year.
So what's the study group that you're forming here?
It's a working group that
Working
is
group.
going to take the space needs study that we just got back and come up with short-term and long-term goals and plans, including financial plans, to meet the
Space
needs that are
needs.
identified.
Okay. Okay. I mean, unless anyone else, Gary has volunteered to be on that.
No.
Good with that? Okay. Anything else? You got a list there? I saw you with your, I mean, we got
Only
time.
money left, we got a bunch more of it. We did bring up, through the process of the Cricket Lane
Cricket Lane,
hearings,
yeah.
and even Cooper Farm, and over the past couple of years, we've had a couple of opportunities to purchase a piece of land. It was the board's decision that it was kind of a hefty price tag for us to buy the Cricket Lane property this time around. But in the past, we have had, I know we have CPC funds but it's all a matter of what we have in there at the time. In the past, I think Mr. Glavy was pretty active in starting and running the land preservation fund, is that what it's called? Land use fund?
Acquisition.
Land acquisition, LAF, land acquisition fund. And it's still active for-ish, and there's
It exists.
$1,100. There's less than $1,500 in it right now.
There's not $1 million in it. We're sure of that.
Yeah.
It's not gonna buy you
Actually
much.
stopped funding it as soon as CPC came online, which, kind of makes sense, but, you start to feel palpably people's interest more and more of going, of
Land.
getting back into that game again. It's a more expensive game than it was 10 years ago, but,
A lot more expensive.
Well, I also think there's a different mindset and drain on CPC before exclusive use for land, right? And that was what we needed. Now it seems like there's some other things that the town needs as well.
That's right.
And-
This is perfect timing for something like.
And one thing that I would like to do, if we do go forward and decide to fund this, is not just put money in a fund, but also pair it with a decision-making rubric, so that we're not held hostage by the first piece of property to show up that matches the dollar value in the account, right?
It's a plan.
Right,
Well,
yeah.
both a rubric and, that was, I think, part of the reason in an earlier phase we were very successful as a town is you can logically look at the 5 parcels at least that I, remember having a direct hand in. They more or less formed a cross right across town, and that was terrific. We may not have that opportunity again, something as if you start at the Morrison farm and end up at the Hartwell property, and in between you have Prouty and Morgan and whoever I'm leaving out, Wickham Frost. Well, that's, there you go. Well, we left Craig out. But that's sort of overarching plan in a rubric for making decisions, as Chase says, I think is incumbent. If we're gonna start putting money aside, we also should start having what are our objectives?
Yeah, I think, this board, was divided. We go back as far as the Williams property even, and we had, we ultimately did not vote as a group to support that decision. It had nothing to do with the land. It really had something to do with no financial plan to buy the next piece of property. What is it? What do we want next? Why is this piece more valuable than that? There was nothing. So I think that's, and Paul, I know you and I talked about possibly starting a subcommittee of some kind to really look at this.
And I think it'll also take some of the emotion out of it when we want to buy a piece of land that may have some emotional tug, but for price reasons or connectivity reasons or various reasons, it's just not a good purchase for the town. And having that pre-formed rubric will really help us essentially say no if we need to.
Right, there actually is a report that was done, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, that basically reviewed and analyzed the land in Littleton, what was valuable, what wasn't valuable, what we wanted to preserve, what, wasn't necessarily a priority. And the committee, what are we, 2017? I think they last met in 2014.
It's the open space plan.
The open space.
No.
No? Because that's formally does that, but it doesn't really prioritize the
Might
way
have
I
been the
think we
open
should.
space. But it just kind of stopped, and I never really knew, I couldn't see where it went.
Yeah.
Because there's some great, it's a big report, there's some great information in there, so that might be a good
I'll bet you
starting
that's what it
point.
is, probably. Because that's a mandated
That gets
component for a lot
submitted
of
to the
things we.
state. Yeah, it's under review right now.
Okay, yeah.
But
So
even
we could
if
get
we
to-
get that-
But it does not have a funding plan in it, for what our target is for how much money we should have to be able to.
Right, but it has priorities.
No, not if I think
Not
about the
the
same
open space
thing.
report anyway.
It should.
I don't know if that's what
Maybe
I'm
it's a
thinking
different
of, but
report.
I'll find out, I'll let you know.
Okay, yeah.
But just a thought here, listening to Chuck, believe it or not, I was listening to Chuck.
Here comes the left hand.
So was it the acronym LAF?
There you go. No, the discussion we had earlier about whether we should take money out of the, quote, savings or borrow for the sewer study. I mean, it's coming basically out of the same bucket, right? You've got $1.5 million that you're talking about taking out of reserves. Maybe a way to think about it is to take some of that money, start the funds that you were talking about, and just sort of reallocating them and saying, okay, this amount of money is for conservation, this amount of money is for COA, this amount of money is for whatever the other next wonderful project is you want to, you want to fund in the future. I don't know, something towards the fire truck, I don't know. Rather than spending it on the design of the sewer system, you've got that money available to you. So you've got some choices, is all I'm saying, in the, before we decide which way we're gonna go, I think, don't discount the fact that we've got that money.
Sure.
In reserve.
So, already. So
Yeah,
maybe you
yeah.
just earmark it differently.
Fred, you well know, that's been a successful model we used in the past for the
Absolutely.
high school and the Shaker Lane remodeling, different school projects, open space
Yeah,
purchases.
absolutely.
Just, salt money away with an earmark on it.
So it just lessens the pain when you get to the time that you actually want to do something. So, yeah, if you really have 2 or 3 projects that you really think you want to support going forward,
You know what
maybe
question
it's
I,
part of the discussion you want to have between now and April or whenever, when we go to press.
That's good.
what are some of our fund balances? That's one thing in the discussion of our annual budget proposals, we never really seem to get into that, never get a look at Dad's checkbook, see what's actually in there.
Well, you drew down capital stabilization.
And I'm still not getting an answer, am I?
Stay out of your dad's checkbook.
I never saw it for 30 years, now he's pulling it out all the time. I don't know. Because he's 91.
All right. Anything else on here, Bonnie, that we didn't cover?
No, I think we sold
We
it.
covered it all, right? Any other questions, comments about capital?
Just as far as the fund balances, just to Paul's point, just to, kind of get an accounting of things right. I think we do have, through the dashboard, the state level, we do have kind of a snapshot of what's available to us.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, I know off the top of my head, the stabilization currently sits at about 2.5 million. Capital stabilization sits at about 490,000. And then what we have in the debt exclusion stabilization account is covering the fiscal, up through fiscal 2024 debt service
That money's
reductions.
already earmarked
So that's,
to go
yeah,
up,
there's
right.
nothing beyond that. But yeah, but I can get the actual numbers to you.
And then the other
But-
fund balances are to look at what the projection is for certified free cash. We don't have, we don't have that,
Yep.
it's not certified yet. But it will be a big number, very big number, just like it's been for the last few years. But there's the opportunity to do a one-time drawdown from a very big number to a more reasonable number, and making a decision to put it into various, stabilization funds, OPEB, whatever, as well as for reserve for future
order to be compliant.
appropriations. Yeah, to comply with the policy, but there is a way to move that money from free cash, which if you don't spend it by the end of the year, then it doesn't become available to you until the next time you certify free cash. But the other thing is that we've had great success in the debt exclusion stabilization fund is the shining example. You put the money in, and then it's there when you need it, and you've got a plan for how you're gonna spend it down. We can be doing that with other, other things as well.
All right, thank you. Unless you got something, you're done? You got something else? I don't leave you out there, Chuck. We need to talk about school reserves at all? Are we good there, or? I mean, I got this on my list. Speaking of checkbooks.
Oh, I thought we were gonna talk about it when we were talking about the operating budget, but.
Well, I had it,
Certainly,
it's
that's
in a
fine.
little different order, sorry. That's the last thing I have for you folks, I think.
Want my copy, Mike?
Well, we're gonna talk about the
I
field
have it.
maintenance. Yeah, I got that, that's
I got it.
next.
Fine.
Okay.
In the back page.
In the back. Man, I need glasses. Holy guacamole. Okay, so I'm looking at the, it's like these revolving funds here for the school department, is that where it should be? On the back of this?
Yeah, these were updated by
I
the
can't
school
even read this,
department
so apologize.
up through fiscal 2018. We just don't have the 2019. It's the separate.
Yeah, I separate blind.
Some cheaters.
No, yeah, maybe. Can't read these.
It's the one that I had emailed to you too.
Oh, that's better. Thank you.
You look adorable.
Thanks. I'm not here for a fashion show. Okay, so 18 estimates, so we're missing 19 in this. Do you have any rough estimates,
I do.
Mike?
Hold on one second.
Thanks. I need glasses. Put it off.
In general, right now, our estimates that we're still working on finalizing is very similar to last year. We talked about the circuit breaker number based on the assumption of the 65% reimbursement. We think we're gonna have about 733,000 in circuit breaker. The other revolving accounts, the athletic gate receipts, student activity fees, are all in line with what we spent last year. We're not raising fees. We don't think we're gonna have any less people taking the bus, or any less people paying the athletic fee, et cetera, et cetera. So in the, what's phrased as the revolving accounts, we think it's gonna be about at least $1.6 million. Right now, the big question mark is how much out of school choice. We start off with $250,000 as an offset to our salaries. We do it annually. We don't have anything else built in there yet. So if that number stays there, then it's about 1.6 million. And that's really the only one that we would have any real room to move on any kind of material basis. The other ones might move a couple $1,000s if our estimates change, if we have more kids playing sports than we had last year, or something along those lines. In terms of Tiger's Dens, the school lunch, the high school auditorium building usage, which we classify as the school programs, that's about another $1 million in spending. Grants, we think, again, about $430,000, which is very close to what we spent this year. We have one grant that's drying up for about $12,000, but we still have about $430,000 in grants, and about $25,000 in gifts and donations. And in total, that's about $3.1 million in our, revolving grants and those other types of accounts.
So is there any chance we can get that in a?
Yeah,
kind of as
we're
an
still
estimate?
finalizing it, but when we do, we'll just take this sheet and push it out.
Push it out, okay. Any comments, board members?
But just one question, Michael, on the choice line.
Yep.
The expenses in 17 were 401. They dropped to 265 in 17, and then jumped to 680 in 18. Is that just a timing issue? Where it's
No,
about
so we
400,
knew,
or-
based on the way the budget went last year, we had earmarked at least $400,000 in spending. That 250 plus another 150 or so to support some of the other items that we couldn't cover in the appropriation.
Yep.
We have had to use some more school choice to meet some sped out-of-district spending. We're hoping that number will drop down, way down, because we won't be supporting some of the other things that we were doing. It'll get moved into the appropriation, and we'll move those sped increases.
Okay.
And that is built in, that you see the $167,000 increase. Some kids will leave, and et cetera, et cetera. So that number will go down, but maybe not as far down as all the way to the 250 offset we know we're going to use.
Okay. It looks like it averages out at about 400. and I
Yep.
just didn't know whether there was an accounting timing thing.
No, it's just,
Okay.
it's usage.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And I think it's important to note that the only one that there's any real discretion on is the school choice funds. All the other ones are dedicated to their
Pretty much
purpose.
done.
Right.
And can't be used for other
Right.
items.
Right.
Questions, comments? Selectmen, anything? No? You guys good? Thank you, Mike. Okay, so, next item, field maintenance agreement status update. Can't leave yet. I'm gonna look at you.
Well, I guess my question is, are you talking about the MOU? Is that what that means?
I would assume that's the MOU, correct? Yes, that's the MOU, it's the way you have it written in there. Yeah, it's the MOU.
Yeah, so we have a framework document that's a modified version of the existing MOU that Chuck and Gary and I worked on this past summer. We are trading emails now to come up with meeting dates to finalize it. Our goal is to have it done by the end of the month, which gives us plenty of time prior to the spring season when Alumni Field will come back online, as well as obviously all the other grass fields and things like that. The bulk of the modifications to the agreement are regarding both Alumni Field and how we account and show the accounting for field maintenance, not just alumni, but also the natural grass fields. The rest of the MOU regarding the agreement between the school department and Park and Rec in terms of they get to use our buildings and, right, that in Camp Tehadawon, and they don't get charged for that, and then we don't get charged for the field maintenance that's covered by other entities, is pretty much the same. That framework is staying in place.
Bonnie, was there something I read about a bond and
Yeah,
this,
we
a deadline that we
received
have
everything
to?
that we needed for bond counsel,
Okay.
and they're reviewing the documentation that was provided by the school department, so we're waiting just for a yay or nay, or whether, they have any issues.
That is a rental agreement, so if we were going to rent the field out to outside groups, we have to have that framework in place, it has to be documented, it has to meet bond counsel's, requirements. We think we have, but as Bonnie said, we used a document that we know, we got some information from Steve Venuti about what it had to cover. We looked at what Chelmsford has in place, and we kind of modified that to fit what we wanted. As our understanding is you have to have it in place, but it can be modified as long as it continues to meet the requirements. So if we decide as we start to rent it that, the market will allow us to charge even more, we'll modify the agreement to charge even more. And, if there's something we forgot to put in there, like we want to rent out, rent it out for other purposes, and we didn't cite it, we'll just put it in there. But really, the goal was to get the document in place to meet bond counsel's requirements. We're not really ready to market the use of alumni in a rental capacity yet. There's a lot more that we have to think about, both as a school department, a Park and Rec, and a community, how we think we want to use that beyond our initial uses for interscholastic and youth athletics, which is really what the driver of that facility is.
Sure.
Anything beyond that is going to be a very small slice of what that's there for.
It was my understanding that there were some restrictions on what you can use the money for.
Right, that's what they want. You have to have language in there that says if you are collecting rental fees, that it's going towards the maintenance, not to pay down the bond. That has to be explicitly stated in the document, which is.
There goes the $1,000 an hour idea.
So what happens?
Well, no, we can still charge $1,000 an hour, but we gotta just use it to cover the maintenance and stuff.
And just while thinking here, if you made 50 grand a year extra, is there anything that would not allow you to basically save that towards recarpeting the field? Right. Is that
That's field
doable
maintenance.
or not?
That's maintenance,
Or-
yeah.
I don't know, I just.
Right, that our operative thought at the moment is no, there's nothing restricting that, and that's exactly what we would do. If we are able to, in some capacity, collect more money than we need for annual maintenance,
Right.
then it would go into a reserve account that would be earmarked for the next capital project, which ostensibly would be the carpet replacement in 10 to 15 years.
So that doesn't run afoul of.
No, as long as
Okay,
you're not
great,
using it
good.
to pivot it.
Right.
And how did Jet Field,
So 2,000 an hour sounds good to me.
with Jet Field taken off this whole agreement, there was some language on Jet Field that I saw in some of the emails that were.
Yeah.
I think it was the language as to a grass surface and.
So now that Jet Field is actually completely separate from alumni as far as regarding any of these rules in play, is that?
It's still
the
covered
same.
by the bond.
It is.
It's the same
Right.
bond.
Okay, so it does fall under the same.
Yeah, I think the issue that was raised by Joe Knox, I think, and I'm still trying to get clarification from him, was that he wanted to make sure that we weren't gonna charge a rental fee to youth
Youth
softball and
sports.
baseball, which we wouldn't. Any rental fees you see on that document are for non-Littleton external groups, right? Like club soccer teams or club softball
AU.
teams, or, right,
Right.
things like that. That's what those fees are for. The fees that we would assess to youth sports are more in lines with the same way we've been assessing them on the natural grass field usage, which is, we know what X amount of dollars to maintain it, you guys use it this many hours proportionately, this is what you're gonna be assessed, which is separate from the rental agreement. And Jet would fall absolutely under that type of umbrella, not under a rental, unless it was truly being rented by, an AAU softball program or something along those lines, which we're not envisioning at the moment, but that could happen eventually.
Good, any other comments? Chuck, you miss
What he
anything?
said.
Okay, folks,
We might actually have an MOU.
Yeah, we have one, it'll be a new one. It'll be modified, right, to be more encompassing, because we have more to think about.
So that concludes our joint, unless Bonnie, we missed anything. Did I miss anything there? This concludes our joint meeting, so thank you very much. Thanks for coming out. Now we can get into some board business. Board business. Why don't we go with member updates first while we're digging out our financial dashboards. Anybody have any member updates? Anything? Members, board members, nothing?
I've got one.
You got one?
Just the, we're on the police chief subcommittee.
Okay.
So we've started reviewing resumes. I'm on the subcommittee to the subcommittee to do the initial review, so. So 41 applicants, just to let you know.
Wow. Hey, can you take it outside, guys, please? Thank you.
We're getting along so well, too.
I know, it's always at the end of the meeting, guys, we're trying to conduct some business. Thank you. Have a nice night.
And get out.
Get out. Go ahead, Gary. Sorry.
You don't have to go home, you just can't stay here.
So 41 applicants, and we've started the initial.
41?
41.
How many inside? From the department?
Internal candidates?
None?
I believe two.
Two? Yeah. But there might be a third.
And so we're reviewing initial reviews, getting them down to a manageable number for the entire board. We're scheduled to meet next week, and after that, it'll really be interviews. Decide on a number that we want to, manageable number we want to interview, whatever that works out to as far as who's most highest qualified, and then we'll take it from there, hopefully. So it's right, what I'm basically trying to say, it's right on line. We're on time, which is nice. Maybe a little bit ahead of time, so we'll, that's kind of the update for.
And when's the decision date, Gary?
There's been a little bit of discussion. What the selectmen have kind of charged us with is in April, I believe, to have names to them so that they can actually hold the final interview of the last couple candidates, make that final decision. I know they wanted some layover with Chief King, a little, maybe 2 weeks before he leaves. June 6th, I think, is the end for him. It's a little less complicated if it's an internal selection or if it's maybe a local selection, as opposed to someone out of state that might, have to move your family or whatever, or whatever the case may be. So, but we're still confident we would be able to do that. So I think everything's
So good, interesting, some interesting
fantastic.
resumes,
No,
yeah?
very good pool. The town's going to be happy and get a very good product, good chief for potentially years to come. So I was very impressed at my first look. So we'll be doing some getting down to the best of the best and see what we can. Yeah, so thank you.
Excellent. Anybody else? Member updates, anything? Okay. Why don't we just take a quick peek at the financial dashboard. I updated it based off of our meeting on the 16th of December, There's probably some stuff we can pull out of here now. I think the Cricket Lane property we can remove.
So here in the packet someplace.
Yeah, it should be in the back of it. It looks like this. It's just a spreadsheet.
That guy.
Yep, that's it.
Oh, there it is.
Everybody got it?
Yep.
But, you know, we're just trying to keep things on here that are things that we need updates on, or things that we need to discuss in future meetings and future fundings, so. But I'll take Cricket Lane out of there. It doesn't sound like we're moving forward with that. And I guess I'll leave the fire truck in there at this point at 1.2 mil, but it looks
I
like we're
believe that
gonna.
is the real number.
That is the real number.
Yes, we just gotta be clear that the grants has been not given to us in prior years, so.
Right.
It's just something we gotta remember that this is,
Yep.
and that will really, I think it needs to remain on here. If not for that number, it's just so we can come up with creative ideas, if we put money aside for it, which I think we started that discussion today. So the impact all at once wouldn't be as much if we don't ever get a grant for this.
Yeah, and I should have asked Mike about the teacher's salary. I don't even know if that, does anybody know if that's been finally resolved, or is it still kind of up in the air?
Oh, the CBA,
The
collective bargaining?
collective bargaining. No, I don't know. I'll get an answer from Mike. I'll find out. And then everything else is pretty much,
What's the school textbook resources? What is that?
yeah, that came up in our,
Well, it's just the capital.
yeah, it's just a
But
capital.
that's already in,
item.
okay, but
Yeah,
it's
it's in
in
there.
there.
No, it's in there.
Oh,
This
oh,
is
okay, I
just
thought
stuff
this
that
was
we're just
additional
keeping.
stuff or no,
No, this is
okay.
just stuff we're keeping on the,
Oh.
on the radar. The big ticket items that we're keeping on the radar, that's all, just so that we're familiar with what's going on. It was just more of a visual aid, that's all this is.
Okay.
Just to kind of give you an idea of what's going on. If you think of anything else we need to add, let me know. We can add it and just a visual.
Just one thing on the beach house. When we went to the breakfast over at Neshoba Tech, the new superintendent made a really, really nice presentation, I thought. She actually included a couple of the star students and whatnot, and I thought she did a really good job. But chatting with Charlie Ellis, he mentioned that he's been waiting for information from Park and Rec on the beach house, because, one thought was maybe the tech would build it. And I'll try to get a hold of Alicia and see if they have enough that they can actually start talking with Charlie, because.
Enormous savings to the town.
Yeah.
Huge.
You don't have to pay prevailing wage.
That's a great
You don't get that.
application for it.
Could probably
I
get it
think
done
it's
for
great.
half the
Yeah,
cost.
and it'd be a great
Right.
project.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally. Right.
Cut the cost way down, too.
Sure.
There'd still be a cost involved, but
But yeah, probably half of what they're planning.
the labor cost is the
He
greater.
was expecting to hear, and he didn't, so.
So you're gonna take that on and talk to Alicia?
I'll
about
just talk to Alicia and see if
Connect them.
somebody should at least contact him and keep him in the loop. I'll do that.
Do we have a design on that or anything?
Yeah,
There is?
yes, I will, yeah.
Yeah, they show
Oh,
a
yeah.
couple different,
They have in land and placement on the land and
Yeah.
all
Oh,
kinds of things, yeah.
some are beautiful. I mean, if it
Yeah.
get done,
Okay.
put a wedding in there if we have to.
All right, anything else on
I'm
this?
done.
Guys, I'm trying to get you out of here before 9. Public input? No.
Oh, Kirby, you got anything?
Okay. Minutes. Did you folks have a quorum at that joint meeting with the selectmen last month?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anybody
did.
take minutes?
No, we.
No, normally
We
we
we didn't vote anything anyway,
It was
right?
the selectmen's meeting,
It was the
right, but we had a quorum.
Right,
but there were no votes.
No
but
votes.
there were no votes.
So,
There's not enough
Do we need to
information
submit
provided.
minutes to say that we had a
If it
joint
was a
meeting?
selectmen's meeting, then they should have the
They have
minutes.
minutes, so.
Okay,
it's
all
covered
right.
by that. Should be covered by that.
Should be covered by that. And then, I don't have minutes from our all-day finance committee meeting. What did you do last year with that? Did you just do a cover sheet that said we met with all the departments and kind of used the cover sheet and submitted that?
Yep.
Okay, then I'll work on getting you that, Marilyn, so we can get that submitted.
I'll link to the video too, if you really want to.
Well, I don't think, can we do that?
You can put it on there, it doesn't
link to the
replace the
video?
minutes, but an addendum or an addition to the minutes, you can put it there.
Okay. All right, so then I'll get that, and then we've got to get that updated.
Let me know.
Okay.
Let me know what you need.
So,
I think I can.
I think the annual report is due next week. Town annual report.
Is it? Does that normally do that this early?
It's a little.
It's
yeah.
earlier than normal, that was,
Holy
That's
smokes.
because
I think it's
Anthony
due on the
wants to have
22nd.
pictures of his
Yeah, and I got to put something in there. All right.
So it just occurred to me, because
Yeah, a little
That
narrative
paper's
to
due
go
tomorrow.
along.
Yeah, the little, yeah, I know. It's just- I'll get something there.
Joe asked me to do a little piece on how PMBC and FinCom interact, so I'll do something.
We speak well together. Something crazy like that. God, that one fell right off my radar. All right, so I'll make a note to tackle that and get something in there, because usually a little blurb about us that we got to write.
Is that right,
Yeah.
Marilyn, the 22nd?
Is it the
That's what they
22nd?
said, but normally by now,
I didn't-
we've had lots of memos coming from the second floor
Yeah.
and the third floor as to when they're due. Usually there's several notes. I haven't
I
seen
haven't
any.
seen
That's why
anything.
I was shocked last night at PMBC when someone said it's due next week.
Right.
I haven't seen the notes that used to come around.
It's like
You might want to just
I'll
double
be
check.
spending the weekend. Thank you for that reminder, because I totally spaced on
But
that.
better check with someone to make sure
Yeah.
what the date is.
I'll find out. I got it as a follow-up. And then our next meeting is on the 6th of March. And then the one after that is on the 3rd of April. If we need to have anything in between then, we'll do that. But the deadline for submitting the warrant articles and everything for the booklets to be printed is the 10th of April. So if we're meeting on the 3rd, we should be able to vote. We should be okay there. And then, we'll have a regular meeting on the 6th. That's all I got. So look for Fred's favorite time of the meeting and motion to adjourn unless you have something else you want to cover.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Good night. Good night at home. Thanks for watching.